Hello again, we are live from the LinkedIn Hub at Advertising Week, and with me is Janet Balis, and she is partner at EY and leader for the strategy practice in media and entertainment. Janet, that's a big title. A lot going on there, a lot of strategizing, a lot of thinking about stuff. So one of the things that you've been thinking about, I know, is something you spoke on a panel about, which is managing disruption. So I've been hearing quite a bit about this disruption concept, and it seems people are approaching it a little bit differently, and I'm trying to really grasp what we mean when we say disruption. So I want to hear from you first what you think is really, what it is, and let's get to the crux of it. Let's talk about what it's doing.
Great. So, I think at its core, disruption is all about change. And I don't think there's anyone at Advertising Week that debates that change is happening really rapidly. I think it starts first and foremost with consumers. Disruption is caused when consumers change the way they behave and consume content in different ways. I know, they're changing the game.
It's making it difficult.
So right now, we've got this whole discussion around how do you, as companies facing that consumer behavior, how do we evolve our business models to adapt to that change and lead the future. So we had a fantastic conversation with a real range of companies that demonstrate that new brands can be created really rapidly. Like you look at a Vox Media that was on the stage, and Jim Bankoff, they just got a $200 million investment from NBC Universal. And then on the other end of the stage, we had people like Bloomberg Media, represented by their global CEO, Justin Smith.
Forever.
Absolutely, and even longer, Hearst, Hearst Media Corporation. So some really incredible players, and then Foursquare, Dennis Crowley, who's the founder there. So you've got just this really transitioning world of brands and where you can build scale with audiences.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because that's been a big thing for us, is building scale and building relevant scale and so on. So what are some of your thoughts on that and how to achieve that in this world?
Well, I think what was really interesting in the conversation today is that scale can be built in new ways if you get really smart about data, if you really understand more advanced, we talk about programmatic, but techniques to build an audience and understand who you're trying to reach and where you can find them. There's no question that plays a role. But what was fascinating to me today is it's not just the new brands and being really smart and agile about arbitraging traffic. It's also about trust and influence and the value of really high quality content. Could be a newer brand, but at the end of the day, I think we're coming back to a moment where content really matters, where trust and influence matter, especially if we go to some of the topics that I know are floating around here, like viewability and fraud and ad blocking and all this stuff. At the end of the day, people will go to the places which they feel connect with them as humans and really present them with compelling content they trust.
So you brought up a really important point, which we have spoken about a couple of different times, trust, and people approach it differently.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that, really achieving that trust with the customers and with people, and as they become a lot more sensitive to disingenuousness or lack of authenticity in that?
Well, I think we're looking at a world where the things that drove great media brands originally, like editorial integrity, continue to drive the future. But I think the way that we get there is a little bit different. I think particularly when you look at newer generations of consumers, authenticity has to sit at the core. We really have to understand the language and the culture that attracts audiences to an experience, and I think that's changing really differently. But at the end of the day, if the experience doesn't have integrity, if it isn't something that's compelling, entertaining, engaging, it won't work.
Another thing you and I were talking about, which I think is kind of interesting, and you have a philosophical approach to where we're at right now, which is it's like a moment of balance, right? We need to have balance. There are so many kind of tensions, things pulling in a variety of different directions, right? So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think this is a moment of balance, because if you look at the pendulum swinging, you look at companies and they go through centralization, decentralization, re-centralization, there's this knee-jerk reaction to swing the pendulum one way or the other. And I think for this moment, it's much more nuanced. So things like data, we can all jump to the topic of data and say we need a big data strategy. At the end of the day, if data isn't married to incredible creativity, we forget that it's not about pixels, it's not about hyper-precise targeting, it's about having a voice. Whether you're a big brand marketer or you're a media company, you have to connect with an audience. So we have to balance things like creativity and data. Another tension we talked about on the stage is the balance you have to strike between people and humans in our organizations and the technology that can really unlock their creativity, their productivity. All of that can happen if we balance humans and technology. To me, it's not a threat, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up something really funny, and I have not brought up Mad Men once this whole entire time, but I remember there was one episode in the last season where they bring the big computer into the office,
roll it down the hallway,
and someone freaks out and goes crazy because of it. But that kind of like, obviously in a very exaggerated way, really, exemplifies what you're talking about in the sense that, there is this technology and it's scary sometimes, very exciting for a lot of other people, but we have to balance it with the human side, right?
Yeah, there's no question it's a big disruptive force, but if embraced the right way, if dovetailed with the people in the organization, it can create tremendous opportunities for growth. I think that the challenge is finding the talent and the culture that can really embrace that balance. Because as you point out, they looked a little bit afraid of that thing when they were rolling it down the hall in that episode. So, how do we get people to not be afraid of it and really understand how the two fit together? It's not an either-or sort of situation.
And on the other hand, get people to remember that it's not going to replace people altogether, because if we lose the human element, I think we're going to lose a lot as well.
Yeah, I don't think of it in terms of replacement at all. In fact, I really think about it as enabling us to do the things that we do every day, that we do over and over again. Let's let the computers do that. Let's let the code do that. Let's let the algorithms do that. But the stuff that only we can do, let's unlock that value. And I think it's looking at those kind of issues that really unlocks a lot of value and new productivity. And everyone obviously is focused on growth.
Janet, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of Advertising Week. Are you speaking again?
I've done 2 panels. I'm done.
You are good.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.